Good morning, everyone. My name is Kotatso Moreto from TelmarHelixa, and I would like to welcome you to our second BrandMapp webinar session of the year. I'm sure you will agree that we had a very interesting hour last week with Brandon, where we learned a lot about some of the big major changes in the SA consumer behavior. On today's webinar, we'll be focusing on how media habits have changed in a fragmented landscape. Without any further ado, please do help me welcome Brandon. Hi, Brandon. How are
Hi.
you doing?
Morning, Kotatsu. I'm very good, thank you. And morning and hello to everybody out there. My commiserations to those of you who, like me, are sitting in Cape Town. I know we always Cape Townians, if we're not talking about the mountain, we're talking about the weather, but it really has been ridiculous. So I hope those of you who are in Cape Town have got your aircon on full blast. You'll probably need it for the rest of the weekend. Um, cool. So welcome everybody. Today we're going to be covering some of the media trends. So let me sort of skip right into it. Um, the starting point always. So for some of you, this is old news. I just need to give you the upfront piece. We often have people joining webinars a little late, and they make comments in the chat going, "Well, that sounds ridiculous. It can't be possible that all of South Africa does that." So let me just begin with just our normal overview here. This is what South Africa looks like when you take the 44 million adults in the country. We earn about 3.7 trillion rand a year, and when you break those adults and households up into income groups, the picture looks like this. About 70% of adults living in households earning less than 10,000 Rand a month. That's the mass market of South Africa. Then you've got this, if I use the term mid-market, it's these people sitting in the middle. So 10 odd million adults living in households earning 10 to 40K. And then right at the top, this little group of top enders living in households earning 40,000 Rand a month or more, which is interesting because on the right-hand side, you'll see what percentage of the total formal income they take home. It's like more than half. So this is the Gini coefficient that we're looking at. And the work that we do in BrandMapp and our survey that is available on the TelmarHelixa tool, our survey only describes the 14 million people who sit in the top 30% of household income in South Africa. So we don't pretend to, if I say X percentage of people do something, it's not of all South Africans, it's of the 14 million people who live in tax-paying households. Okay, so that's just the first thing. So if somebody makes a comment in the chat, just somebody remind them that you missed the beginning. The general picture of this, for those of you who missed the first webinar, it's available online, and there's some very interesting kind of movements and trends behind this. I just want to remind you of two of the sort of the themes almost that we're superimposing on all of our data storytelling this year, because I think they're kind of important. So the first one is just this idea that as human beings, we've got this tendency to sort of put markers in time. We have like anniversaries and birthdays, and but time's a continuum. And the media landscape it sits on a similar, I call it the conveyor belt of time. These things arrive, and then it's the next big thing, and everybody kind of forgets that the next big thing just becomes another piece on the conveyor belt. And sometimes that conveyor belt goes around in circles, and sometimes it goes over a cliff, and but I mean, there's still people listening to terrestrial radio. There's still people with radio sets, on a desktop. I don't think that anybody is actually still using a BlackBerry, but you know what I mean. It's important, I think, to remember that all of these things that arrive, they don't just come and go. A lot of them stick around, and old habits sometimes linger for a very long time. So that's the first just sort of thing to bear in mind. The other thing that we identified in that first session was that as people who like looking at data, and for me, the beauty of having access to something like data on a cross-tab tool is being able to go and trend data and kind of go, well, what did the picture look like 5 years ago, and how much has it changed? It's probably the most powerful way for me to start trying to look for the stories in data. And one of the things we picked up this year is that it is the first year in ages that we've seen 5% shifts in behavior across a whole multitude of different things. 5% is an interesting number, right? We're talking about a group of 14 million South Africans. So do the math. I've done it for you here. 10% would be 1.4 million people changing their behavior in some way. So when you see a 5% shift, it means there's potentially somewhere near 700,000 South Africans who have consumer class South Africans who've changed their behavior in some way, manner, or form. And we think 5% is kind of important. When I worked in the magazine industry for a lot of my life, and I remember the first time I saw 5% as a shift in magazines, and I was like, gotta watch that. Got to be a little bit careful. So, something's happening there. So when we talk about 5%, just remember to kind of keep it in perspective. 5% is a meaningful shift in any data set.
Yeah.
Okay, so where does my story for you start? So, I think we've all been talking about digital media, but all the impact, and it's one of those conveyor belt things. Digital media has now been around for a very, very long time, and two news stories caught my eye very recently, which I just wanted to start off with. This was the first one. Is my broadband website published a story in February this year with this headline: "Data prices plummet in South Africa." Now, there's been a lot of chat over the last couple of years about how expensive data is in South Africa, and it is still relative to some other places. But a very curious thing happened, and they published this awesome chart. So this is from my broadband. It's the information is coming from ICASA, so I would imagine it's pretty reliable. And what is super interesting is, so the left-hand side's 30-day prepaid, the right-hand side's postpaid. And look at how the smaller bundles haven't really changed in price. But the bigger bundles have dropped dramatically. You know what I mean? You're like 5 gigs on a postpaid data contract, like halved. It's quite radical, and I don't know why we didn't tell the story more, unless ICASA is live. But I can't believe they are. I think so. So I think it's quite a pivotal thing. Is that we have seen data prices tumbling, and access to data or access to the internet has almost been exponential. What's not even behind here are things like the government's program. The government has a program for rollout of public Wi-Fi. There's Wi-Fi all over the place. It's sort of getting to the stage where pretty much everybody should have access as long as they've got a device that can tap in somehow. So that brings me to the second story. The second one I found, this was on the Media Online. The Media Online is an old media turned into a new media. We've been mates with them for a long time. And I saw this story. So again, this is from the end of last year. And that's South Africa's number one in. So, we've talked about this before, that we're like number one in the Gini coefficient, which is not a great thing. We're number one in underfilled illiteracy rates, which is not a great thing. We're also number one at rugby, a good thing. But this is a new number one. And I was like, well, what is it? Well, it turns out that there's a study that was done, and I can't vouch for the study itself. You can go and read the story on Media Online. But it's a survey that was done, a global survey, and it turns out that we are number one in the world's heaviest internet users. I don't know which part of, whether they were looking at the whole pyramid or not, but it's a really interesting kind of competitive set there. It's like, it looks like we're in the World Cup football and we won. But quite an interesting statement to make. And inside this article was this little table. So the 75.7 on the left-hand side is what they estimated the internet footprint in South Africa is. So 75.7. So maybe it is, maybe their sample was of pretty much the whole country. But just look at these numbers that they put up there for the estimated consumption of internet. And I think they're pretty large, hey? 3.5 hours on social media, an hour and a quarter listening to podcasts, and 2 hours during the day or during your every day listening to music of some sort. I can't vouch for the credibility of the survey, but it almost doesn't matter. It's telling a story, and the story is that, geez, we use the internet a lot, eh? We're like, it really has become a huge part of our lives. So what are some of the things that we see in the data that almost validate this, and it feels like something's grown here in quite a big way? So here's a growth story for you. In 2021, the question we ask is, how do you connect to the internet at home? And this was what the fiber penetration was coming out of COVID. 32% of the middle class, middle market, and 43% of top-end homes were already connecting to the internet via fiber. Fast forward to this year, and that's what the picture looks like. So in 4 years, it's quite hectic. In 4 years, we've pretty much got a 70% penetration in
Yeah.
top-end homes. Fiber.
Now, how has that happened? Looks like almost half of the consumer class now has
Uh,
access to internet. How has that
yeah,
happened?
it's more than half. So it's super interesting as a story. I mean, it's almost a webinar in itself. But there are a few things. First of all, remember that during COVID, these guys were vital service suppliers. So I mean, I remember sitting here one day watching the sidewalk being dug up outside my house, and they were laying the pipes, and now there's little grey boxes everywhere. So access to network, COVID was an absolute, like, it was a game changer for the
Yeah.
fiber industry. And then there's been quite a lot of regulation changes. So this is private enterprise you're looking at here. They dropped all sorts of regulation around fiber, and it just means that these guys, the moment you've got private enterprise involved, there's going to be heightened competition, and prices are naturally going to drop. It's like the moment you've got private sector competition in any category. And I think it's an amazing thing. It's like an amazing win for the consumer class of South Africa, because
Yeah,
once you've got fiber in the home, like the world changes. It's and almost a hell of a lot of it's unlimited or uncapped. So it's the three pillars of media, from when I very first started writing for street newspapers and things. Entertainment, education, and information. That's the kind of Venn diagram of media. Whatever you're doing, it's in one of those three things. And people can now sit at home and get unlimited access to all three of those pieces of the Venn diagram in whatever quantity they want. It is the reality, and it's happened really fast. It's like this number. You go back to pre-COVID, it was nowhere near. Yeah.
yeah,
And neither were some of the things that we kind of access in terms of media. So this is just an aggregated chart. I went into the data and I just pulled a whole lot of different things just to try and show you the relative footprint of media and where it sits in people's lives. We measure 72% of the total consumer class saying they still read newspaper content, either online or in print. 67% regularly listen to the radio. So that's like daily and a few times a day or more. 65% of people watch TV every day. That's an interesting one as well, because we think we might need to fine tune that, and as times go ahead, because I'm not sure that somebody who's sitting in their bed watching streaming movies on their phone would necessarily say they watch TV. But so it's a tricky one. We do have a little bit of an indicator of that just now. People who say, I've seen an outdoor advert that actually caught my eye in the last few weeks, 62%. So, subscribe to Netflix, 60. Look at these numbers. They're absolutely huge. And most of these are traditional media, so the footprint of the old media world is still absolutely massive in people's lives. It's not like, I titled this talk Fractured or Fragmented. And, fracturing would mean something's broken. And I don't see the break. It's not a break. That's not what's happened here. These things are still in our lives. What has happened, though, is that there's now a whole lot of other stuff that people are doing because of the digital world, right? So here are some of the footprints of what people are doing online regularly. 60% of people saying I listen to music. 54% watching video content. So it could even be watching TV on my phone. We're not really sure, but it's a hell of a footprint already. 34% of people saying watch TV specifically. 30% YouTube every single day. 26% of people using Spotify. I mean, these things are just like it tells the story that my slide said. It is unlimited education, entertainment, and education. Absolutely massive. So the question in our minds as media people has always been, at what point will we start seeing that fragmentation starting to have a bit of an effect? And now I go back to the first webinar that we did, where these 5% things are really interesting, because our theory is that what's happened over the last couple of years is constant sort of financial pressure. Even if these people are in tax-paying households, something's got to give at some point. And it feels like maybe because of food prices going through the roof, or petrol being 21 rand 50 a litre or whatever, like it just feels that the last year was a year when something changed in our general behavior as consumers, and
Yeah.
we definitely see it in media. So the question has always been the same, like how often do you watch TV? And that's our trend for the last 4 years. So
Yeah.
so TV slowly, and again, it's you have to just be intelligent about how we interpret this. I don't know what people actually consider to be watching TV anymore. Maybe it is sitting formally in front of a flat screen thing in front of you. But the fact
Yeah.
that there is a shift indicates a mindset difference. I think
Yeah.
that's what we've
Yeah.
seen.
5% is quite a huge drop. Do you perhaps
Yeah.
make why that happened?
So, well, I think there's one particular reason, and the place I can show to you is actually here. Okay, so TV
Yeah.
went down 5%. Total radio listenership's down about 6%. So, how often do you listen to the radio? We've got 33% of people saying hardly ever, never. Okay, that's the half empty glass. The half full glass is that almost 70% of adults are still saying they listen to radio pretty much every single day. Okay, but if you want to know what the reason for these things is, it's the darn youth. Kotatso, it's you and your friends, and it's, no, no, I'm not being rude. I think the view that we're taking this year is very generational. I think that there have been some pretty amazing shifts in specifically generational behavior in the last couple of years,
Yeah.
and last year feels like a year when things really, really changed. Which is kind of the theme, a bit of a theme today. So with radio in particular, how's this chart? So this is the radio listenership chart with seen through a generational lens. So 49% of born frees, of Gen Zs, are saying I hardly ever or never listen to the radio. And that number's just climbed up and up and up, and it's pretty significant. The most significant thing, of course, is that as we'll discuss in a moment, these
Yeah.
behaviors traditionally younger people don't listen to the radio as much. It's always been a thing, and in fact,
Yeah.
the Gen Z number that you see there is actually the same year on year. So the people who traditionally will listen to radio the most, which are the working people, the parents in cars driving to work, driving back from work, they're still listening to as much radio, but there's definitely a downward trend for younger generations. So I think it's because to use a classic old boardroom bingo model, the blue ocean and red ocean. I think we just need to accept that we've been telling the story for a long time. We're finally in it fully. We live in a red ocean of media. We can get it wherever we want, and all of those things we've been saying for many many years, that they've come to fruition, and now for the first time we might be seeing a sort of an evolution of behavior of how we consume content, how we consume news, how we consume all of these things. Because if you're
Yeah.
swimming around in this red ocean, you can't grab everything. You know what I mean? There's just doesn't matter how buoyant your wetsuit is. You can't grab onto everything. You've got to start choosing. You've got to start choosing and making choices. And I think maybe we're entering that phase of media, is just a slightly more, same as with the general consumer behavior, people shopping at fewer shopping malls, people shopping for fewer, for more selected brands or more selected brand repertoire. I think we're starting to see that in media. So here's a little bit of proof for you. In Gauteng, we see the average number of radio stations listened to by people who do listen to radio going down quite significantly from 3.6 to 2.9. Again, I think I made a joke of it the first time. I'll make it again. Numbers like this don't look significant unless you've had a diabetic diagnosis and you realize that, zero point 0.4 or zero point 0.1 is the difference between life and death.
Yeah.
Um, so it is quite significant, right? I mean, if you could tell the story sort of like this, that people who've had 4 stations programmed into their radio are only hitting 3 of them in the last year, not all 4. There's a good story behind this from a radio perspective. As you know, we're all eagerly anticipating the BRC data coming out with some new radio stats, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they pick up. I have a feeling that what might become more important than ever with radio is that P1 metric. What is your most listened to station or favorite station? Because the
Yeah.
moment repertoire shrinks, time spent listening, TSL, could potentially go through the roof for a lot of popular stations, a lot of most listened to stations. So I think there could be a really good story in this for radio. If people's repertoires are shrinking and you're the station that they love more than anybody else or go to most, you might end up really winning in a sort of a fragmented landscape. We see these things all over the place. Here's another little indicator of the kind of thing that I think is in people's heads. Like, you start asking that question, do I really need TV, DSTV? I unfortunately am a sports nut, so I do really need DSTV. But I was pretty wounded as a premium subscriber when I didn't get my Winter Olympics this year. It's like, I really look forward to seeing those. I call them the Bond girls. They do that cross country thing where they ski and shoot, and it's like, I didn't even get. I got to see ice skating. Anyway. So do I really need DSTV? Good question that goes through people's minds. There is data. Obviously, we cover DSTV and TV stations in the data. And those of you who subscribe to BrandMapp and use Telmar, you can go and dig around and find the bigger trends for yourself. Thought this one is just interesting. So this comes out of the streaming services. Netflix has been in an interesting sort of battle as all of the newer streaming, the Disneys and Primes have come on board, but it still maintains a really big stronghold. DSTV Stream kind of losing ground. So it seems obvious. We know that DSTV has been losing subscribers, but it's just showing you that in this process, in this red ocean of media, it feels to me like people are starting to make decisions. The two on the right-hand side are super interesting to me. I don't know. Are you a YouTube Premium subscriber, Kgathatso? Have you paid the money?
No.
Okay, so
no, I'm not.
If you're a YouTube user, the moment you sign up and you pay that cash, like, the whole experience changes. It's an ad-free YouTube is a thing of absolute beauty, and it's worth paying the money for. And I think we'll see that number climb and climb and climb as time goes on. Prime Video, like, really interesting. It's that's a proper win. That's a lot of people sitting in that 18%. So it feels like, yes, things are changing. The trend, if there is one, is I really think people are getting a little bit more selective when it comes to media. So what are some of the other biggie stories that we see here? Well, we live in pretty interesting times. News and finding out what's going on in the world and trustworthiness and all of these things they're very much part of the media landscape. And I found a really interesting story in this year's data about relating to this simple question. So we've asked this question for the last couple of years. How do you get your news, or i.e., how do you know what's happening in the world? Okay. So this might freak out those of you who are not data geeks out there, but I'm gonna. It's quite a complicated story to tell. So I've tried to tell it in the simplest way I can. We obviously list all sorts of media, going all the way down to podcasts, and where we list, I think, 22 different media channels. So I've just taken a generational view of, like, the top 8 ways in which different generations get their news, and it looks like this. The boomers, so the older generation, the people who grew up on a diet of magazines and newspapers and radio and TV. This is where boomers say they're getting their news. 48% of them reading free news online. Makes total sense. Reading free news online, it's so easy, especially if everyone's got fiber access. And then look at where they go to. 46% TV, so very heavily stacked in TV news reports and radio. Even a bit of reading printed newspapers coming in at number 8. And you kind of look at this and go, yeah, it's interesting. The WhatsApp and the mobile apps, that's part of that conveyor belt of time. It's like, boomers are just people. They too, they're not special because they are a little gray-haired. Okay, so what about the next generation? Well, the next generation down would be the Gen Xers. And Gen Xers are kind of similar in some ways, although you'll see Google suddenly popping up into the top 8. Reading free news online remains up there. Radio now becomes relatively more important. Like I said, the Gen Xers are the guys in the car in the morning, listening to, trying to get a handle on what's going on during the day. Next generation down, the Afro Millennials. Well, that's kind of interesting. Reading free news online, you'll see, is it's the ubiquitous. So that's the common thread. They're still listening to the radio. But now suddenly, Facebook and TikTok comes in. TV news reports quite high. super interesting. And then you chuck the Gen Zs in. And how radical is the different sort of size and scope of this picture, right? The first thing
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
yeah. Who would have thought TikTok being number two is quite
No, it's like number
amazing.
two. I mean, effectively, you can take read-free news online out of this picture because it's kind of it's sort of obvious. The fact
Yeah,
is that if you take just access to online news out of the room, the way that born frees are most likely to find out what's happening in the world is on TikTok and then Instagram and then Facebook. Interesting that radio does quite well. Um, so if you sort of just lean back a little bit and look at this picture, what I find fascinating about it is it feels like as you're getting younger, the total scale, like the total pool, the red ocean that you're swimming in, seems to be getting fuller and fuller, right? That there's a far more kind of selective vibe going on the left hand side. On the right hand side, it feels like the buckets are all a bit fuller as you go on. So that's the first thing that's interesting. The second thing is just how the different journeys of these media through the generations look. So TV news reports actually just falls off it it falls off the chart for Gen Z. Then you look at something like radio, and it actually kind of does quite a good job. It's still pretty powerful and up there for everybody. And then TikTok comes out of nowhere. It's like storming out of the wings stage left. And it hits the Afro millennials as number four, and it hits Born Freeze as number one. So I guess the interesting thing for me is that as a media strategist or as people working in media, you have to understand these stories. You have to understand what are the powerful things, what are the things that are going to stick around. Where are you going to get your most reach? All of those things. I think if you don't put a generational filter on it, you are in kind of real trouble. And it's a difficult thing to work out. That's what all of these things look like. So for all the media planners out there, all you've got to do is solve this little challenge. It's not that difficult, surely. Um,
yeah. Yeah, and Brandon, we all know how much of fake news and AI generated content
mm,
there are on these platforms. So would you say that young people just believe everything that they see on
uh,
social media
yeah.
platforms?
So very, very good question. I'm about let me talk. Let me take that thought and move it into the next sort of concept here, which is
Okay.
I think that media. I think that trust. It's probably going to be the most dominant word in my sort of mind for, well, maybe for the rest of time, actually, when it comes to media, content, and all of those things. Because
Mhm.
news media is just content, right? So all of
Yeah.
these ideas, you can just translate them into content in general, and I think the same stories will come out. It is becoming incredibly difficult to trust what you see, right? And especially the social platforms. I don't know. I can't tell the difference between some of the AI bombs falling in the Middle East and the real ones. It's very hard. Um,
Yeah.
so, so bank this thought, and let's move on to the concept of trust because um, we ask a very pertinent question in the data, which is which news media do you trust? So, getting your news and finding out what's happening is one thing, but trusting it, as you're pointing out, is a completely different thing. And I thought this is really interesting. So I'll give you a view in a moment of what the different things are that different people trust and to what level. But if you take the negative set, like the people who say I don't trust any news media, that's what the generational view looks like. 26% of older people in South Africa, like I don't trust anything, and yet only 12%. So the younger you are, the more likely you are to trust
So,
news in general, right? So I wondered if there's not, and this is not, this is now a theory I'm going to throw out there. It's an educated theory, but it is still a theory. So I had the question in my mind, like, why on earth would Gen Zs be more than twice as likely to trust the news than boomers? It's a and I'm fortunate in that about a year ago we had a new member join the team at BrandMapp and Y5. We Ashley is your generation, Kotatso.
mhm.
She's very Gen Z, and she's joined us as a youth strategist to try and unpack some of these things. And so they're super interesting. So I'm not in the habit of reading what it says on PowerPoint slides, but in this case, I'm just going to do it quickly because I asked Ash to have a look at this whole thing. She can't join us today, unfortunately, but otherwise, her She'd be up here. I'd be a real thorn amongst the roses. So this is what Ash said to me. She said, for older generations, news is destination based. They know what and who they trust. Okay, so they're going to those newspapers and they're seeking stuff out. But
Yeah.
younger people, they don't get news. It just sort of happens to them, right? It's so the way she put it was the algorithms surface news and then creators frame it. The young people then decide whether it's worth validating or not. So it's almost like it's that red ocean idea, except you're not
Yeah.
panicking swimming in the red ocean. You're just sitting there being bombarded by all of these things, you know. Um, I like the way she described it as news being ambient. You know, that in my whole life as a young person, I've got all of this content coming at me from all these, and so it's a very ambient environment. It's feed based and creator mediated, and then super importantly, they being younger people need traditional media to validate what their feed and peers are telling them, and then the important part, and vice versa. Okay, so thought that was super interesting. So this is maybe the world that we're trying to describe and understand. And as I said, it's not just about news, it's about content in general, right? I love this idea of discovery becoming passive. You know, it's a so okay, so where would we find some indicators of the story in the data? This is what the full list looks like. So we've taken like what media do you trust, and I've broken it up into I've double generation this, right? So Gen Zs and millennials as the gold bar, and Gen X plus, Gen X and boomers for the red bar. I think it's such a fascinating story because look at how much Gen Z still trust newspapers, television, and radio. You know how the younger cohort do actually trust those media, but they're also
Yeah.
much more like some of the other media as well. Whereas older people are like TikTok. You're kidding me? Don't trust it for for what it's worth. Um, and the lovely part about this is that when we first picked this is a sort of a 3-year trend that this is the most exaggerated we've seen in it. But our first theory was that what younger people were doing was that they were discovering stuff on social media and then
Yeah.
verifying it with traditional media, right? Um, what Ash kind of threw out as an idea, which I think is far more interesting and has far bigger implications for the media industry in general, just in terms of what you believe and how you believe it, is that it actually looks more like this. That for younger people, it's a constant kind of it really is a conveyor belt of discovery and verification. It's not, it's not a one-way gate. They are as
Yeah.
likely so newer generations are as likely to validate what they see in traditional media by seeing what socials are saying as they are to do it the other way around. Does that
Yeah.
sound right? You,
Yeah, it does. Makes
yeah.
perfect sense. Yeah.
So think about that as a in my generational thing, my conveyor belt sort of view of the world. If this is what digital media and the massive impact of digital media, if it has had this effect, that it's actually changed the way we validate all information, not just the news. It's not just Donald Trump riding an AI rocket over New York. It's like this is media in general you're looking at, right? And we think that this whole concept of trust it's a couple of conferences we've been at this year already. The concept's been thrown out there about, how the onus has shifted massively onto corporate South Africa to do their own reputation management. No one else is going to do it for them. They've got to do it because I don't even know. Forget the AI stuff in the media world. I mean, just on a brand and product level, the whole idea of trust we think has become incredibly important. So much so we've got a major piece of work in the shoot this year, trying to understand trust in media, in brands, in products, as consumers in South Africa. Where does this word trust fit in, and how are you validating it? And I think if we can unpack that properly, we can really start adding insight to the media world about how and what they need to put out there to
Yeah.
service us as consumers, as the audience. Anyway, so that's I thought it was kind of interesting. It's just a possible big shift. And the reason that I think it's important that we try and understand these big sort of generational shifts, again, it's something that I said in that first webinar, but it's as applicable now. There are a lot of grey-haired people sitting with iPods on, talking to their grandchildren in foreign countries. We tend to forget that some of these technologies have been around for a long time. And my kind of
Mhm.
mantra at the moment is this: that remember that the new habits of older generations are just the old habits of younger ones. And with some of these devices and behaviors, they're already pretty old behaviors. It's um, and if the population is youthifying, as in young people will always get older and old people will pass on, it's a fast process, I guess, and technology has just made it faster. So I think we need to watch these things as trends. Here's a great example of kind of a generational inherited behavior, right? I had this idea, podcasts. Everyone's talking about podcasts and what's the impact of podcasts. Is everybody listening to podcasts? Well, the answer is podcasts have definitely made a big impact, right? Over the last couple of years, we haven't seen a
Yeah.
massive growth, but it feels like the people who first latched onto podcasts have stayed there. And the people who first latched on the podcasts were the millennials, right? So this is a super interesting view for me. The far right-hand side, you'll see that even 60% of boomers are saying that they do listen to podcasts, maybe just a few times a year. So podcasting is definitely part of our media landscape. But look how similar the frequency use is for the born frees and the Afro millennials, right? So what it means is that is a millennial behavior that's on the conveyor belt, and the Gen Zs are just following that generation. So
Yeah.
in 6 years' time, 7 years' time, that said 37% will probably have moved across. And then at some stage, something will take a podcast's place. We'll be calling it a different thing, or maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll all have, transmitters attached permanently under our skin, and, but this is a great example of how you've got to watch these things, and don't just call it like a millennial medium, or don't look at TikTok and go, yeah, just the youngsters. It's like, it's not. 40% of boomers are visiting TikTok. And then the last sort of piece of that pie, just to give you an opposite sort of story. We've asked this question for many, many years. Which of these things do you regularly do online? This is a selection. This is what I would call some of the practical things that we do online. And again, just remember that people of my generation, I was a small child in the 80s, and I used the first computers that arrived in South Africa. We had the first Apple that I remember when it arrived. I was at junior school. We were the first people with like Commodore 64 gaming machines.
Yeah.
So don't tell me that the PlayStation generation are the original like gamers. No, that was us. And when you look at something like playing games online, it's look how kind of ubiquitous it is. It's pretty flat. So these things, just my term, it's not a technical term, but I think the idea that the internet and how we use it for these more practical things, it's cross-generational hygiene factors. We expect the web to deliver it. It's got no generational skew. But there is the newer generations, right? So the podcasting generation is effectively Web 2.0. And that Web 2.0 came in quite a long time ago. So what do we see there? Well, how's this for? So this is in that same question. These are the things that there are significant generational skews in. Listening to music, watching video, using AI, and taking online courses. Well, that's one of the older things, but it's still got a significant skew with the other generations. So this is a great example of like these things right now are new behaviors of new generations, and very soon they're going to become they're old behaviors of new generations. Very soon they'll look like the new behaviors of older generations, but they aren't. It's just younger people getting older and taking that behavior with them.
Um, then I remember the first webinar. I think more than 80% of the people confirmed that they were using AI. So I think I'm kind of confused as to, yeah, just an example. Get the
Okay.
Gen Zs, yeah, 37%.
Good memory.
Yeah.
It was the number was 80% of people. It was a different question. So the question about AI, we said, which of these AI tools have you used? It was just like there was no regularity or frequently. We ask her, what do you regularly do online? So what that means is that AI, about 80% of the consumer class in South Africa has used AI in some way. They've accessed it, they've tried it out. We saw a lot of people trying to use it for just for fun or creative use, like messing around with it. So that's not your hardcore like. I mean, I use AI mostly to make the nice graphics that you're seeing here, like literally every single day. My team use it in various different ways every single day. We're a business, so if you look at the aggregate here, it's probably about 30%. If you were to take I don't know the exact number. It's in the data. We can go find it, but I think it's about 30%. So what it means is that 80% of people have tried out AI, they've used it, they've accessed it, but there's about 30% of the population that are actually using it regularly. It has already become part of their like everyday routine. Same as watching video and music.
Okay.
So that's that for me, that's the big old story about what's going on. To summarize, I guess I would say that red ocean thing is what's in my head, and just this idea that maybe what we're seeing after quite a long run up is finally there's just too much. Like our inboxes are too full, our social feeds are just hammered by all sorts of things, and maybe we're starting to see that radically fragmented media landscape. And it's not just media as in TV and news channels and stuff. It's content in general. It's become so overwhelming that we're actually, as a society, we're starting to make some choices. So I'll leave you with, this is my final thought for the day. I do wonder. I read a lot of news about what's going on in other countries in the world. The social media bans that are being proposed for under 16s. There's 7 countries in Europe. The one in Australia seems to have had some impact. I think we're going to see more and more of that. There's no doubt in my mind that the dopamine effect. There is a drug effect at play with some of the digital platforms, and there's no reason why we shouldn't start trying to regulate them, like we have other things that have socially that create social ills. There's also weird stuff happening. I don't know if you picked up this morning, but do you know there are 21 people currently in custody in Dubai for cybercrime offenses because they're the people who've been bust taking videos of drones hitting properties in Dubai and posting them on social media. One of them's a 6-year-old child. I mean, they like detained a 6-year-old for posting a video that was on CNN this morning. May not be true. I don't know. We'll have to verify it on social media.
That's very
But so I just wonder if maybe we're just moving into a slightly different phase. Maybe that red ocean has become pretty damn scary, and maybe younger generations will actually just want to take time and breathe the fresh air and go for a walk on the beach. And so here's a thought. I'm just throwing it out there. I don't have an answer for it, but maybe digital detox is going to end up being a bit like sort of the mental health Ozempic of the future. We don't know what the effect of Ozempic is going to be yet. So this is not an advert for Ozempic. Quick fixes seem to come at a price. But I do think that if I was crystal balling it, I would say all of what I've shown you today, and just this idea of how people are struggling to deal with this total overwhelm, maybe we've reached a point where actually, and it might be the younger generation who lead the way. Maybe we've reached a time when people are just going to be going, can everybody just calm down a little bit? I'm going to limit my time I'm not going to access all the different platforms, and I'm just going to become much more selective about the content that arrives in me or happens to me in younger generations. And that behavior is very fast going to just turn into the way everybody actually behaves. And that's what I have for you today.
Thank you so much, Brendan. This was an insightful session. I think also one of the key takeaways that I took is that the beginning of the webinar, I thought to myself when I saw that we have digital as well as traditional media, I was like, I think we already know the answer that, digital is definitely overpowering traditional. But as we went on the webinar, I got to realize that actually this makes sense because a lot of, like me myself, I'm a Gen Z and I spend most of my times on TikTok. So I would use TikTok to find out maybe the news, and then I would then verify by cross-channeling, maybe go on Twitter or listen to the radio quickly, maybe switch on my TV just to verify if what I'm seeing on TikTok is the actual truth. So this was quite a very insightful session. Thank you so much. Once again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. A special thank you to the Y5 team. Please note that this video will be shared with everyone and will be accessible on our TelmarHelixa YouTube channel. So please note that this information is available to BrandMapp subscribers and is available on our Explore software on TelmarHelixa. And please do visit our website just to schedule training for the next training sessions. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest
Thanks,
of the day.
everybody. Thanks,
Bye.
Natasha.
Bye.
Cheers.